Hey, welcome back to the fourth rail. I'm Tom Knighton. Today's question we've got is: does popular culture actually matter, especially when you are trying to combat the woke nonsense, the liberalization of pretty much every aspect of our lives? Does pop culture really matter? Should we even be paying much attention to pop culture? And my guest today is somebody who he and I already know we mostly agree on this topic. He's somebody who has worked in pop culture. I've written some novels that were published on, indie published, but he's been knee deep in the belly of the beast as a artist working for companies like DC. That's right. My guest here has actually gotten to color in Harley Quinn's boobs, which is like the greatest job ever, if you ask me. I'm talking about my friend Brett R. Smith. Brett, thanks for joining me, man.
Oh, absolutely. Great to be here. And
Yeah.
yes, I, ha- I
So,
have I have colored Harley Quinn's boobs many times.
didn't you do Wonder Woman's too?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, the issue I worked on for DC was a called Wonder Woman 77, and so it was
I think,
one where we did everything like the TV show. So we did Linda Carter's likeness. So on each page, Wonder Woman looks like Linda Carter. We have all the characters from the TV show. It was actually really fun. But I'd worked on her like in Justice League and a couple other titles. But this one was particularly a lot of fun because I grew up watching reruns. And
same.
in the 70s and early 80s of Linda Carter, Wonder Woman, which is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Uh, that's living the dream there, man. I'm
Yeah.
telling you.
It was a
You
good,
you basically lived
I mean, it
you
was a
lived
good
every
show.
12-year-old boy's dream.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a good show. I think it's really solid, but at the same time, I mean, it's Linda Carter, who's one of the most beautiful women ever.
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. So the question that brought us today, there have been a couple of conservative commentators who have taken issue with popular culture. Matt Walsh has said that, uh, comic books and video and cartoons are children's that women don't find that attractive and everything. And it's you and I are of the opinion that this is actually a horrible, horrible way to approach popular culture if you're trying to win people over.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Especially if you're talking about just sort of like the part of the country which hasn't been influenced. There's only so many of us that pay attention, especially guys like us, but even people who vote, it's a small minority of people in comparison to the 320 million people that are in the country, and then the people that are not engaged, who have yet to be influenced, people that we can reach and can influence and can bring to our side. These are people that watch movies and that watch animation and cartoons and read comic books and graphic novels and partake in uh, artistic mediums of visual storytelling. That's kind of the preferred way that we like to consume our stories. So I think that not only do we want to, we can't just be preaching to the converted all the time. And not everybody wants to subscribe to the Daily Wire to watch two movies.
Yeah.
I'm happy that they're, that's the funny thing is, Matt will poo poo a lot of these things and portray them as gauche and portray himself as above all this stuff. And at the same time, his own company is engaging in this stuff. So,
Yeah.
and Matt will be the first one to tell you that he made a film. And I'm obviously, happy and congratulate him on making a film, a documentary, but
Mhm.
that's not the same as Terror on the Prairie. And Terror
No.
on the Prairie is going to be something that's going to be able to reach out beyond conservatives and beyond the political realm, or outside what I call the divide, the political divide. And that movie is going to be able to not only um, project its messages and its action and entertainment, but it's also going to reach people who Matt and Jeremy and everybody at Daily Wire wouldn't otherwise be able to reach. And that's the entire reason why they're doing it,
Yeah.
to harness the power of pop culture and visual storytelling, which is the most powerful medium that you can harness. It's goes back to the caves of Lascaux, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. That's all sequential storytelling. So, I mean,
Hmm.
this is how we communicate as humans beyond politics, and that's why they're doing it. And I think part of Matt's thing is it's a shtick. I think he wants to
Yeah.
portray this, I don't know, 50s dad who I sits around, drinks scotch, and reads novels on 18th century warfare. That's not mainstream America, dude. I mean,
No.
not, so it's like, conservatives can either, adapt, improvise, overcome, adapt with the times and start communicating to people beyond the political divide with mediums of which they consume, and accept what Andrew Breitbart said, which is politics is downstream from
Yeah.
culture. Um,
Yeah.
or they
Absolutely.
can become the Whigs, because
Because I know
that's where
one of
it's
the
going.
things that, yeah, one of the things that kind of irked me about this is on one, you've got people saying, well, this stuff is woke. It shouldn't be this way. We shouldn't have to deal with this. And on the other hand, they're sitting there going, well, you shouldn't watch it anyways. Well,
Right.
make up your freaking mind. If we're supposed to be above it, what do you care what the plebes are watching?
Right. Yeah,
It's like they
that's
know deep down inside that there is a ramification from it, because a lot of
absolutely.
stuff I watched as a kid, we're talking about some of the stuff we watched as a
Mhm.
child. It played a factor.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it played a factor.
Especially at our generation, because in the Xers, you have higher divorce rate. You've got the latchkey kids. You've got one parent at
Mhm.
home, and one of the things that Adam West said in an interview one time was he said one of the things that happens to him all the time over the years when he does signings anywhere, and this is the star of the '60s Batman, Adam West. He said that boys, young men, older men came up to him over the years and said, my dad wasn't around, or my dad didn't pay attention to us all that much. And
Mhm.
your character on Batman, whether it was Bruce Wayne or Batman, was kind of like a surrogate dad to me. And,
Yeah.
to whatever degree these characters that all of us boys watched, over the years, there was definitely an influence. And a lot of us didn't have dads around all the time. I didn't. I saw my dad 3 months out of the year, 2 weeks at Christmas, 1 week at spring break. But all these characters that grew up were all positive role models for young men. And, because ultimately these were toy manufacturers that were targeting young boys
Right.
to sell toys, but they were doing it in a way, by way of telling stories. And, G.I. Joe is probably, I think, one of the better comparisons, or examples, where
That was my
obviously,
jam.
yeah, me too, man. I love the cartoon. I love the toys. And we're talking about the '80s relaunch. My brother grew up
Yeah.
with the 12-inch stuff, and then
Ah, yeah.
obviously those kind of phased out. I inherited a lot of that stuff, the Adventureland stuff, which
Mhm.
is very cool.
Oh, yeah.
But Hasbro had never really taken it to the degree that they could, because in the '70s, the toy companies couldn't do more than 30-second commercials. Come
Yeah.
1980, you've got an FTC ruling that lapses and allows them to do pretty much whatever they want. Uh, this was put on Reagan's desk in 1980, and he decided to not sign it.
God, God
So,
bless Ronald Reagan.
so you can thank Ronald Reagan for He-Man, which was the first
Mhm.
one to create a character in house and then go develop it into a 22-minute episode, 65 episodes a year, and done by the pretty much the godfather of Saturday morning cartoons, Lou Shire. And then Hasbro followed suit with Transformers and GI Joe, and these were also comic books. They contracted out DC. Mattel did for Masters of the Universe to do a comic book line, and then you also had Marvel contract out Marvel, or I'm sorry, Hasbro contract out Marvel to do GI Joe and Transformers comic
Yeah.
books, and then obviously the cartoon comes along. But whether it's Optimus Prime, Duke, Flint, Lion-O from Thundercats.
Yeah.
Gosh, there's so many that are big brothers or surrogate dads, or uncles. And then I could even take it to Mike Seaver, or Silver
Hmm.
Spoons or Different Strokes. There's all these TV dads as well who
Yeah.
we all grew up with, who were also, all characters. And I watched Good Times. I loved Good Times.
Dynamite,
Gosh,
man, dynamite.
yeah. There's so much
I
great stuff that
I
was
would say
positive
Dynamite.
and moral, and
I would say Good Times did a lot for adjusting where my view might have been
oh
on
God,
racial
yeah,
matters,
absolutely,
because I grew up in the South in the 70s.
yeah, right,
We were still desegregating.
right,
My dad was in law enforcement, so we saw a different side of black people here because of my dad's job that wasn't always positive.
sure,
There were also black officers who my dad was friends with. I was friends with their kids, so we had that. But then you know, uh, you had JJ and his mama, and Dynamite.
yeah,
I mean, and
yeah,
it was
and
it
Janet,
was
yeah,
a
Janet Jackson. I mean,
Janet Jackson,
yeah,
Janet Jackson.
yeah.
And it was yeah.
But I think for you and I, being young and impressionable, we would probably watch those, and we would see our family, or we would see elements of our family.
Yeah.
And it was no different than the Cosby Show, which was, we as a family, in the 80s, network TV was everything, and the
Hmm.
must see TV, NBC. You'd have Cheers, you'd have Cosby. We
Yeah.
had a staple of what we would watch. MASH up until its ending, which was
Hmm.
pre-dinner. Family
Yes.
Ties. Family Ties, I think, was post dinner, and then because we didn't watch TV when we had dinner, unless it was a Suns game, unless it was NBA, and usually the playoffs. Otherwise, that wouldn't fly. Dinner was about communicating, gathering and communicating.
Yeah.
having some sense of a connection, even
Yeah.
if
We
it was
couldn't
for
even see
30
the
minutes a
TV.
day.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
couldn't even
yeah.
see the TV from our dining room.
But it's so funny, I mean, there was no tablets, there was no devices. It was really about, and probably for Xers and the parents who worked most of the days, this was the only really face to face you were going to have for more
Yeah.
than probably 30 minutes, right?
Mom and dad had just been home for like an hour,
Right.
and that hour was spent changing clothes, cooking dinner, trying to rest up a little bit. And this is the first time when they could ask, "How was your day?" And like a dumbass, I guarantee you did the same thing. You were like, "What you do in school?"
Nothing.
Nothing. Notice we went the exact same place because we
Yeah.
knew that nothing.
Nothing.
And
Nothing
especially
to report. Yeah.
when I got to high school, I was going to a private school, and my dad would be like, "You mean I'm paying all that damn tuition for you to do nothing?" And
Oh
I'm
yeah,
like,
I
"It's
heard
not
that
that."
too. Up
Yeah,
until sixth, or eighth grade, I went to private school, and then when I went to public, that was high school. But yeah, I remember hearing that one. What am I paying for? But um,
but yeah, we never watched like you. We never watched that,
right,
anything on there. But then when dinner was over, we
yeah,
cleared the table. We'd pile up in the living room
yeah,
because I mean I had a TV in my room. I saved up money and bought my own TV, and my parents were nice enough to hook cable up.
uh-huh,
But I had a black and white TV. Theirs was color. Guess
right,
which one I watched every chance I had.
right,
And yeah, Cosby Show was a staple.
yeah.
It feels a little creepy now considering what we
You
know of Bill
know, I,
Cosby,
I, I know, I know, but I
but
can't. It's
you got to
weird.
separate the artist from the art.
Exactly.
And it's
There's so
sometimes it's
much.
hard, but
There's so much great stuff there, and
yeah,
then you say to yourself, does it outweigh what he did? And then I just say to myself, yes, it does, because that show, like you said, I think helped to a large degree end a lot of racism and a lot of
yeah,
we were always taught, never judge book by its cover.
hmm,
Not the color of the skin, the content of the character. And then also our generation was very much sticks and stones. Words will never kill us. It'll never hurt us.
yeah,
So I mean, we come from a different stock than what there is today, and a
very
lot of
much
that
so.
stuff, back then also, you didn't have this culture of victimhood and this what I call a victim chic culture in society. It was more about celebrating winners and
Mhm.
victory and being number one.
Well,
I mean, this is reflected all throughout the culture and the society. And we wanted to be, the great Nike or Gatorade commercial. with Michael Jordan, with the song, I can never get it out of my head. I want to be like
Me,
Mike.
yeah. As soon as you said this, Michael Jordan, it just I want to
Right.
be like Mike.
It's a great, and he's playing ball with the little kid, and it's a
Yeah,
great commercial. I mean, it is
it
pure
really is.
Americana, and
Yeah,
and Jordan, represented so many good qualities. And then because we had Charles Barkley in Phoenix, so there was the duality,
yes.
because Chuck was like, I'm not a role model, and he did that whole thing,
It
which
was
was
it was
total
very
shtick, but it
yeah.
was great, and it was on brand with him, even though Charles was a role model, because I mean, despite, and I saw Charles many times, as he flew past me down Shea doing 90 miles an hour in his open top Mercedes. I mean, this guy, he and Dan Marley, they both race up and down Shea back in the 90s, and I saw them. You see the Suns all over the place back in those days. You'd run into them. It was a lot of fun. But Chuck is still a good role model, even if he does have a big mouth. And he
Yeah,
recently just ran his big mouth and pissed a lot of
but
people off. But that's what Charles
but
does.
yeah, that's just Charles Barkley.
So,
To
but
put it,
you
as
know,
much as I love Jordan, my basketball jersey in high school was 34.
yeah, no, I hear you.
I mean,
No, man. I mean, I mean, Michael's the best. He'll always be the best, and
mm,
that's the short and sweet of it.
but for entertainment's sake, Barkley was something.
He was so much fun, and
Yeah.
I went to a lot of playoff games that year. I was just blessed
Oh,
to have tickets from my uncle during that period, and man, that was I was at the game where we lost to the Bulls, Game 6. It was awful, but it
yeah.
was it was it was a lot of fun, and that was. NBA was very different back then. Obviously, it's a very different
Yeah.
game.
Hmm.
Speaking of the NBA, I watched, and we're talking pop culture. I watched Winning Time from HBO. It's fantastic if you get a chance to check it
Okay.
out. Um, but the idea that all of us growing up during this era where we had parents that worked, and a lot of times we were alone at the house, and we had these shows, and whether they're surrogate fathers to a bunch of boys who don't have a good masculine moral role model around, or maybe they're your big brother, your uncle, and then you've had these shows that would, I think in a lot of ways, like I said, I think even shows like in Living Color, I think the rise of the Wayans just destroyed racism
Oh
in
yeah.
for our generation. The fact that, and Mel Brooks and Richard Pryor with Blazing Saddles showed us the
Oh,
way. They're the ones that first showed us that if you lampoon everybody, then nobody's offended. Okay, so Wayans SNL to a large degree understood this through the 90s. I think Mad TV. I think the Wayans probably in a bigger way than people realize. I think Keenan
oh yeah.
Ivory Wayans is an absolute genius. Um, and I just think that, like, I don't know, man. I just kind of get the feeling a lot of the times that I don't want to say that things were solved, because they never are. Nothing's ever perfect, because
No.
man's not capable of that kind of perfection. But I think to a large degree, for Gen Xers, I don't think that race was as a big a deal as it is for people today. And I think that a lot of that happened because of the type of entertainment and pop culture that we were consuming at the time. And it was the aim, in a lot of ways, of the writers on these
Hmm.
shows to tell the stories that they wanted to do by placing, I think, good morals and good messaging into this stuff. And we were talking off air, and I mentioned I had seen Kirk Cameron in an interview recently, and it was on Clay and Buck, and they asked him, why did all that stuff in the 80s, why was it so good, and why did everyone love it, and all these people watch it, why did millions of people tune into these shows, right? Cosby, I mean, God, we're talking millions of
A
the
market
ratings,
share.
market share,
Yeah.
absolutely. And he
A
said,
share nobody can get now.
oh yeah, I mean, you just look at Dallas, and, like, 20-30 million people tuning into one show. I
Hmm.
mean, that just doesn't
Especially after
happen these
JR got
days.
shot.
I mean, I think Yellowstone is probably the closest thing these days to pulling those kinds of numbers, or getting close to it. But, as I've said before, Taylor Sheridan is an absolute genius, and Yellowstone is basically a Dallas, a modern Dallas, basically. I mean, you can plug all the characters in, and South Fork is Yellowstone. It's really pretty brilliant what he did, but it's not anything really new. However, it's great that, in the sense that it's helping to romanticize the West again and cowboys and
Mhm.
romanticize that kind of work, which is really shit work, frankly.
Yeah.
That is hard, tough work, dude.
Yeah.
Ranching, farming, these are not
Yeah.
things that kids want to.
Cattle are cattle are not docile,
No, no.
giving, loving animals.
But at the same time, how do you get people back interested in it? How do you keep it alive? How do you foster it being important within the culture? Well, you create a show around it that people find really entertaining and fantastic, and you shoot it like it's a Marlboro ad from the '80s.
Yeah.
And it's just like, how can you not fall in love with it? So, but I mean, I think that, like, Taylor gets it. Taylor is our age. He grew up
Mhm.
with the same kind of pop culture, and he understands, how to drive messages. And you watch the two Sicario movies, dude, and it's like, how do you not get concerned over the U.S. southern border
Right.
after making it both through both those films? So,
Right.
but I think, we were really lucky to have what we had growing up, and I think, the future of the right connecting with people, new people, not just preaching to the converted, and also reaching people with better messaging is through storytelling and pop culture, and basically a lot of the things that we've been um, absent from for the last
Mhm.
30 years.
Yeah.
You
I know
know,
you had Nick Searcy on one of your podcasts.
yeah,
Um,
he's great.
and Nick was talking about how for a long time anything that you could call a conservative movie was really a Christian movie.
Mhm.
It was, you know, um, overtly Christian. It was actually designed as an evangelical aid. But there's a lot of people who just, well, let's be perfectly honest, a lot of Christian movies are crap. They're
Well,
just not good
yeah,
movies.
well,
Some are
they're
good.
some
Um,
are good. I mean, but I mean,
yeah,
most of them preach to the converted, and
right.
within the first 30 seconds that you're in a Christian type
Yeah.
film, and I forgot to make the point about Kirk Cameron.
Mhm.
Clay asked him what was so great about that, and he said that it's because the studio execs and the powers that be and the money people all understood that America's a Christian nation, and there's so much that they're willing to put up with, and some things are off limits, and we're
Yeah.
just not going to go there because it'll cost us market share. We want, the whole impetus of the entertainment industry when we were growing up was meat in the seats. Okay.
Yeah.
You want as many as warm bodies packed in there as possible because that's money. That's how you cash in. And now it's more, how do we drive a message? How do we
Yeah.
drive narratives? How do we change the culture in this weird way rather than maintain what we have and make people happy and walk out of the theater feeling good, you know?
Yeah. And it's funny to me because okay, we have right now in the theaters Indiana Jones. You and I, same generation. Indiana Jones was the shit, man.
It's a
It,
no-brainer. This
you
should be
know,
the number one movie right
should
now.
be. I mean, even with him being older and everything, doesn't matter. We now have more disposable income than when we made Indiana Jones a hit in the first place.
Very
We should
true.
be going there every freaking weekend,
Yeah,
and they can't figure out how to get us there. But then
yeah,
in contrast, you've got this movie about a guy that most people had never heard of named Tim Ballard
right.
called Sound of Freedom that on a per screen basis is kicking the hell out of Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you know, it's not a necessarily an overtly Christian movie from what I understand. It's about a real situation. Oddly enough, a message.
right.
Human trafficking is bad. This should not be a controversial message. Um, but then it's like you look at something else that Hollywood actually did right. Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
They they put out a movie
right.
older. The protagonist from the first one is much older. Things are different. He's having a
Right.
hard time fitting in, but ultimately he's still Maverick, and you still root for him throughout the whole
Sure.
thing. And it made bank.
Mm.
It made them a freaking fortune. It just shows the audiences aren't that different.
Well, Tom refuses to bow to the woke, cabal.
Yeah.
Tom does not make movies with identity politics. Tom doesn't insert political statements. Tom makes mass entertainment, and he'll be the
Hmm.
first. He'll be the first one to tell you that. And in a lot of ways, Top Gun Maverick is a political movie because it's so anti-political.
Yeah,
It be
agreed. It's so pro
because
America.
because he won't play their game and do what they've done to Barbie and so many other kind of beloved franchises and IPs and kind of these iconic characters, American characters, and they do it on purpose.
Mm,
But I think because Tom refuses to do this, and he's done it again with Mission Impossible, this new one. All the Mission Impossibles are mass entertainment movies. They're
yeah.
meant for meat in the seats. Tom makes the same kind of movies that he made in the 80s and in the 90s.
Hmm.
I mean, I think he understands that kind of that Bruckheimer Simpson, Days of Thunder, Top Gun.
Yeah.
Bruckheimer Simpson. I think, and Jerry still understands what America and largely Middle America. The big blue ocean of audience out there, right? Which
Hmm.
is what I talk about when we're talking about Matt Walsh and Daily Wire and reaching out
Yeah.
to, the normies, the people out there who have yet to be
Hmm.
influenced. Those are the people that's your bread and butter, man. And that's who you want to make your movies for.
Right.
And you want to give them something that's pure,
Hmm.
that is just pure fun and escapist because
Yeah.
that's why they're there. I mean,
Right.
I'm all for smaller movies that have messages. I love, small independent films. What's his name? The guy who did Sideways has a new movie coming out with Paul Giamatti. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but
I know the
I saw a preview for it
yeah.
today, and I'm like, that looks funny, and that looks quirky, and I like
Right.
Alexander Payne. I think he's an interesting guy, and I love Sideways. So I'll probably check that out, and I'm glad to see some small movies. Some maybe
Yeah.
90 to $100 million movies. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So, and I'd like to see some smaller movies, but I saw an interview with Matt Damon where he said that the reason why we just don't have as many movies as you and I had in the 80s or the 90s, and there'd be dozens of movies back then. I mean, they were cranking out stuff, and now you just
Yeah.
get this tiny little batch every year, and it just sucks. But he said that killing off all the physical media, killing off Blu-ray and DVD and all that stuff is why you have a smaller piece of the pie that Hollywood is willing to slice up to give to each director. So,
Mm.
because there was this idea with the physical media that maybe you had a soft opening, or maybe it just didn't do well. Maybe you're a Blade Runner and it just flopped. And
Yeah.
people went to Star Wars and they went to Indiana Jones and they figured they were going to get this heroic character and they get this something completely different. And they're like, what is this? But
Yeah.
years later, because of VHS and DVD, Blade Runner became a huge, huge hit and it turned profit and a sequel. And I just think that
Yeah.
there was always that opportunity with the Blu-ray and the physical media release, if a film didn't do well, in order to maybe have a second go at it. And without
Mhm.
that, Matt said that you have less films like Good Will Hunting, and that's a shame. That's a
Yeah,
real
that is
shame.
that's a really good one too.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about the resurrecting. My favorite TV show ever was Firefly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Half a
I mean,
season canceled in the middle of the run, and the physical media sales
kept
and
it alive.
rentals,
Yeah.
they got a motion picture out
Yeah.
of it. Never before happened. It would not have happened without this fan
Yeah.
base growing from the DVD.
Had that happened today, Netflix and Amazon, another studio would have picked that up because that's happened before. That happened with Cobra
Yeah.
Kai.
Mhm.
Cobra Kai starts out on YouTube
YouTube.
Red,
Yep.
which doesn't even exist anymore. But I saw the previews for Cobra Kai and I said, okay, that is awesome. So I subscribed to YouTube Red and I watched Cobra
Same.
Kai way before anybody was watching it. And I kept telling
Yep.
people, I'm like, you've got to watch this show. It is
It
so
was
brilliant.
great.
And then I was like, they lampooned the woke. He makes fun of millennials. He calls them pussies. It's unbelievable. I'm
It's
like,
amazing.
it's amazing. And only Johnny could get away with it, right?
Right.
So finally, they I think season 2 or season 3, YouTube just said, "Nah, we're out. We're going to kill this YouTube Red. We're going back to just subscribe, no ads, and we're not going to produce any more content. We're not, it's just too expensive." So as Sony was producing it, but YouTube was the platform, so they
Yeah.
found a home over at Netflix and it's probably one of the main reasons I haven't killed my Netflix. I just watched a fantastic documentary on Netflix called Muscles and Mayhem. My girlfriend and I watched it. It's all about American gladiators, and
Yes, I've seen that on there.
it is the
I
unauthorized
remember American
doc.
Gladiators well.
Oh, we all did. We loved it. We
Yes.
were addicted to it.
Every Saturday, it
Yeah,
was like Saturday afternoon, it came on,
yeah,
uh, Fox 31, channel
right.
4 at here locally. Yes, I remember what channel it was on. I watched
Well,
that shit.
again, you look at that show and the impression that it had on boys and young men. We live in this such a feminized and emasculated culture now, and
Yeah.
and the funny thing was when you go back and you look at what we were brought up with, it's like Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Van Damme, and then you watch show like American Gladiators, where the guys, I mean, obviously it's fun to watch the local people go up against them.
Right.
The architect, the physical trainer, this guy, that guy, Joe Blow.
The vampire from Lost Boys.
But yeah, exactly, that dude. But we all
Billy Wirth
loved.
was on.
Yeah, he was. But we all had our favorite gladiator, and our female and male, and it's kind of
Mhm.
like you'd root for the gladiator a lot of the time, because I mean I would.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of the point of the show. They were sort of the heroes in that sense, and these were big, muscle bound, really physically fit guys who were all just roiding their brains out at the time. But we didn't
Mhm.
know that, and who
We didn't
cares?
care either.
We didn't
Yeah.
care. We don't,
I was like,
and I
"They're on steroids? Where do I
I
get
mean,
them?"
they were on that, they're an HGH, and it's like, they talk about that in the doc, and they're completely and totally open about it. But at the same time, no, back then nobody really knew how bad that shit was for you. And even Arnold and a lot of those 70s era guys, I think, either did HGH or they did steroids up until a point, because it starts to physically have bad
Mhm.
effects on men, because it produces estrogen. So,
Right.
but it's just sort of interesting. Stallone, Arnold, both these guys have had the heart surgery due to the use of steroids
Mhm.
back then. So,
Well,
um, just crazy, man. We
what
those are such. I look at those days, and the culture also took a lot of risks back then, and that's
mm,
one of them. I mean, one of the bad ones. There's a lot of good calculated risks that people
yeah,
took back then, but growing up, we lived in a culture that was more go for it,
yeah.
and take your risk and make your mark and kick some ass. And you know what? This is a country where even if you fall flat on your face, you can chapter 11 that shit and start right over
Oh,
again.
yeah.
It's a
So
brand new day.
it's funny. It's funny. We're talking about the roided up guys back in the day, the American Gladiators, Arnold and Conan,
Right.
and Rambo and all that shit. And it's
Beastmaster. Yeah.
yeah, Beastmaster. Well, Beastmaster is actually one of the more attainable
That's
looks.
true.
But it's like it reminds me of this meme I saw where it's like, this is Barbie. She gives an unrealistic body image to young women,
Yeah.
and it's dangerous and blah 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 blah. And this is something men don't have to deal with. This is He-Man.
Right. Right.
Yeah. This was our standard.
Well,
This
and
was what, thank
yeah.
God for John McClane, because it was the only way I could look like an action hero.
Yeah, but the funny thing about that is that even though I didn't look like He-Man, you didn't look like He-Man, you still, these were aspirational characters.
Right.
It's kind of like, they're like demigods, or Apollo or Zeus or something. It's just sort of like, you'll never get there, but you can aspire to be. You can work your way. I mean,
Yeah.
you can get there if you want to work out 4 hours a day and eat 4 to 5 times a day. You can get there. I
Oh,
mean,
more than
Arnold.
that.
All these guys have shown that
Yeah.
you can definitely get there. But at the same time, it's funny. It's like it didn't make them less relatable the way they were written. And
Yeah.
the other funny thing about Transformers is that, it's like it's like this argument that the SJWs and the left make, which is these days they'll say, if the show doesn't have a character that looks like me and goes to bed with the same people as me, and has these qualities of me projected onto them, then I can't relate to it. And I just say to myself, when I watch Transformers, I didn't need there to be a human looking robot that looked like me and talked like me in order to identify
Yeah.
with the Transformers, or with some of the characters,
I
and say,
found that I
I
had
want to
no
be like Optimus Prime.
yeah, I was about to say I have no trouble relating to a semi truck.
Exactly. I mean, that's the funny thing, is that you can make anything relatable. You can you can, through visual storytelling and that kind of medium, especially animation, you can do so much wonderful things and abstract, things that you can't do in film.
Mhm.
And it's another reason why, in a lot of ways, and I know some of those guys, I know some of the guys from the Hasbro creative team from the 80s who worked on Joe, and these were all, most of them were right of center Republican voting proud Americans, and you can
Mhm.
see that reflected in the work. It's very, very obvious.
Oh yeah.
And the funny thing about Joe was that it was very much a Cobra was very much an allegory to Soviet Union, or to really a very black hat, white hat. I mean, and that's kind of the
Right.
simplest way to go. And it was funny because it wasn't Hasbro that created Cobra; it was Marvel that created Cobra. When they went to them, all they had were the Joes. They didn't have any bad guys, and they said, "Well, you need some bad characters. You need somebody for GI Joe to fight." And they
Mhm.
said, "Well, who's GI Joe going to fight?" And Archie Goodwin, who was one of the writers at Marvel, just said, like, out loud, he said, "Why doesn't GI Joe fight Cobra?" They're just like, "That's brilliant." Like that's how it all
Mhm.
started to kind of happen. But
Yeah, and it was like it was funny because you look at them, they carried the toy at least. Cobra had AK-47s.
yeah,
Their helmets were somewhat reminiscent of Nazi helmets.
kinda, yeah,
They
yeah,
were like an amalgam, and they were a ruthless terrorist
terrorist
organization.
organization, right?
Right. So they were, I mean, it was this amalgam of everything we
Everything
hated as
evil,
a country.
yeah,
It was just amazing. And there
yeah,
was like no redemption arc. It,
none,
you know, it was
no,
like a character could redeem themselves by pushing away Cobra and joining the Joes,
right,
but there was no way that you could suddenly make Cobra, well, they're not that bad.
yeah, yeah,
They
they
they're
they were
they're really
bad,
they're really just trying to,
yeah,
trying to save the environment. They're trying
and
to fight
and
climate change.
and
No, they were trying to take over the freaking world.
it was no different than the Decepticons, just through, kind of different ways.
Right.
And then you had sort of that brilliant, you know, interface between, and an alliance between the humans and the Autobots, and that's always
Mhm.
that's sort of the interesting mix in with the story, and that's what makes that story unique and interesting,
Mhm.
not just good versus evil. And Transformers has a lot of layers, funny enough.
Yeah.
But and it's a really brilliant series, and I've met some of the guys, like I said, met some of the guys who worked on those first couple seasons and worked on the movie, and they're all really super creative guys. A lot of them are D&D guys. They're kind of like, they're all
Nice.
old, they're all older Gen Xers in their 50s, and they were in their 20s when they were working on those shows.
Oh
And it's
man.
and I asked one of them, Flint Dilly, I said, how did you know that young kids like me, could, young boys who you're really exclusively writing for. You get some girls in there, but maybe some tomboys and whatnot. But it's mainly a boys' show. I said, how did you know we could handle all this stuff, like Optimus Prime's death, and all these kind of more adult themes, and this sort of melodrama that you bake into it, along with the action. He just said, part of it was getting past the censors, having some form of a moral message and whatnot, and having to play off good versus evil. But he said, we all knew that you guys were pretty sophisticated, and you were kind of like our little brothers at home, and we knew what you could take, and then it was also, what can we get away with, right? What will the
Right.
censors and studios allow us to get away with? But even the people who okayed this work, right? The censors and the networks and whatnot, they all obviously understood all of us to be pretty sophisticated and be able to understand it and comprehend it. And I think that also says something about the culture of that time. I think that they understood that maybe our generation grew up a little bit faster than maybe what the current ones do,
Yeah,
being
we
being at
weren't
home
coddled.
so much.
We couldn't be coddled because no one was there to coddle us.
Well, I told somebody the other day, do you remember these commercials that would run at night? They run like around 9 o'clock, and it would be like a little PSA. It would come up and it would say, "Parents, it's 9 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?"
Yes. Yes.
And then the saying, be home before the street lights
Street
come
lights
on.
are on. Yeah.
So I mean,
We
these
all heard it.
days, or do these kids even rise up out of the couch from playing video games 8 hours a day? I suppose maybe to go to the
I
bathroom, but
I can my son's 22. I can count on one hand how many times he went out to play.
that's so sad, man. And I saw the other day, 1 in 5 kids are obese. they're talking about giving kids Ozempic and Wegovy and all this shit. And I'm just like, man, we had like at least 2 recesses a day. We had soccer or some kind of extracurricular thing we were doing. I had boys club basketball, Pop Warner football. I did Kempo karate. And then in the summertime, we'd obviously in Phoenix, triple digits. You'd stay inside and you play video games, play Nintendo or Atari or ColecoVision or something, maybe for a half hour to 45 minutes before you'd just be like, okay, enough. Now I need to go and
Yeah.
do something else. And we go and jump in the pool. So we were active there. I mean,
Mhm.
Phoenix just had Tucson just had 117. No, Phoenix had 115 day the other day. And Tucson was like 107. And it's like these, like the longest consecutive streak of like heat. And I remember as a kid in 1990 or 89 or 90, we had a 122-degree day in Phoenix. We were outside that day. We didn't even
Yeah.
know. I
Right.
didn't I didn't check the weather when I was 12. It'd just be like
No.
my buddy lived down the street and there was a dirt lot next to his house and we were building a BMX track with
Yeah.
shovels and rakes and shit. And we went out there in the morning and we were digging holes and doing all this crap. And then it got really hot and we were just kind of like, this sucks. It's too hot. I'm going home. So I went home. He went home and I walked inside and I was like pale white. I was like white as a sheet. My dad's like, where have you been? I'm just like, I was down at Jeremy's house. And he's like, do you know how hot it is outside? I'm like, no. And he's like, it's 120 degrees. He's like, stay inside today. He's like, what's wrong with you? It's just like,
Yeah.
I don't
Well, and
know. Who
you
cares?
mentioned BMX. That was another thing we all had.
Yeah,
We had
right.
bikes.
Right.
And
Right.
it didn't matter if your friend lived across the street from you. You still went bike riding.
Oh, yeah,
You
man.
rode your bike to his house.
We
You
went
rode, even
everywhere.
if you couldn't leave the block, you rode up and down that block until,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
worn the tread off your tires. And it's like, how can you be fat with that?
Well, yeah, and also, I'm not going to sit here and say that the food that we ate wasn't better than the food they eat today. Funny enough, even with all this organic and fresh local stuff, I think that what we ate was probably less processed, and
Well, we didn't
people.
have DoorDash.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing, man. It's so convenient to just
Mm.
eat trash these days, and
Yep.
we don't eat out much. I had Freddy's today, which is a rarity, but or we do like Chick-fil-A once in a while. But most of the time, like 98%
Casey's
of
hot
the
chicken.
time, we're eating in and cooking in
Yeah.
because it's expensive to go out, and also my girlfriend's a fantastic cook, and she can make stuff that's better than most restaurants. But at
Well,
the
there you
same
go.
time, it's like you know what you're putting in your body, and
Yeah.
that's kind of a nice thing to know.
Yeah.
So
And I think that's a big part of it. But,